Hi, and welcome to today's lesson, the second day of scientific notation. Our learning target for today, students will be able to multiply and divide numbers in scientific notation. Please write that in your notebook. Example 1. Multiply or divide. Write your answers in scientific notation. And we're not going to use calculators for these first couple examples. So we have 2 times 10 to the negative 2 times 3.1 times 10 to the 5th. I can see that this is just one number times another number. So these parentheses aren't necessary. So if I drop them away, I would have 2 times 10 to the negative second times 3.1 times 10 to the 5th. And now the commutative property says that I can rearrange my terms, multiply them in any order, and get the same answer. So I'm going to multiply my constants, and I'm going to multiply my terms with exponents and use my rules of exponents. So 2 times 3.1, 2 times 3.1 is 6.2, and 10 to the negative second times 10 to the 5th would be 10 to the negative 2 plus 5, because when we multiply two things with exponents, we add their exponents. So your final answer is going to be 6.2 times 10 to the third. Then I'm going to take a look at that and ask myself, is that in scientific notation? And yes, it is. So there's our answer. For our second example, we have, again, multiply or divide, write answers in scientific notation, no calculators. So we have 1.4 times 10 to the 6th divided by 0.7 times 10 squared. You might also see it written where they include the parentheses just to set off these two numbers, and that's just their way of saying it's this number divided by this number. If it's easier for you, you can write this using division more like a fraction bar that we've been doing before. So you can write it as 1.4 times 10 to the 6th divided by, using a fraction bar, 10 squared. And the advantage of doing that is now is more clear that we have our constants divided by each other, and they don't have exponents, so we treat them as regular numbers and simplify using division. And then we have our terms with exponents that we're going to simplify using our rules of exponents. So I'm going to go back here and say 1.4 divided by 0.7, that's 2. And 10.6 divided by 10 to the 6th divided by 10 to the 2nd is going to be 10 to the 6th minus 2. So when I simplify that, I'll get 2 times 10 to the 4th. And I'm going to look back and ask myself, is that in scientific notation? And yes, it is. So there's my answer. Example 3. Multiply or divide. Again, scientific notation, no calculators. So we have 6 times 10 to the 2nd times 3 times 10 to the 7th. And when we multiply these, again, just like example 1, we're going to take our constants and multiply those two together. And then we're going to take our terms with exponents and multiply them together using our rules of exponents. So 6 times 3 is 18. And then our exponents is going to be 10 to the 2nd plus 7, 10 to the 2 plus 7. So this answer is going to be 18 times 10 to the 9th. But when I go back to see if that's in scientific notation, I see that this number is too big. This number has to be between 1 and 10, greater than or equal to 1 but less than 10. So it's too big. So I'm going to take that 18 and move the decimal point one spot to make it 1.8. So if I make my constant smaller by one place value, I have to make my exponent bigger by 1. So I'm going to add 1 there. So it looks like my final answer is going to be 1.8 times 10 to the 10th. And finally, here's our last example. In scientific notation, we're going to multiply 3.009 times 10 to the 5th times 8.5457 times 10 to the negative 3rd. And this is similar to the previous examples where we're going to multiply our constants together, but in this case, to multiply that without a calculator would be a little bit time consuming. So in order to be more efficient with your time, you should probably use a calculator on this type of example. However, when you multiply your exponents, you're not going to need a calculator for that. So I just used my calculator to multiply these two in red, and I got 25.714. And let's just round to the nearest thousandth. And anytime you need to, round to the nearest thousandth. So I got 25.714 times, this will be 10 to the 5 plus negative 3. And I know we're going to add our exponents because they're asking us to multiply these two numbers. So I'm going to get 25.714 times 10 to the second. But then again, if I go back and look at this, 25.714 is too big by one place value. So if I make that smaller by one place value, I have to make my exponent bigger by 1. So my final answer is going to be 2.5714 times 10 to the third. Lastly, before you start your homework, it's important to note that on your homework you'll be given problems where we'll give you one number in scientific notation and then another number, and likely they'll put those numbers in parentheses. It's really, really important to pay attention to the operator that's between the parentheses, because that's going to tell you what you want to do with your exponents. So if you see a dividing by symbol between the parentheses, that's going to tell you to subtract your exponents. If you see a multiply symbol, it's going to tell you to add the exponents. And again, the non-exponents, the constants, they get treated like regular numbers where you either will divide or multiply. And finally, it's also important to note that when you do divide two numbers in scientific notation and you subtract their exponents, you always take the first one minus the second one. In this case, in scientific notation, it does not matter which one is bigger or smaller. It's always the first minus the second. Ms. Becker can give you your homework now. It's a worksheet, homework 27. Please label it homework 27 on top. Yes, you can write on it. Numbers 1 through 10, do not use a calculator. 11 through 20, you may use a calculator. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend.